Okay, here we are picking back up again with U.S. presidents. So, Andrew Jackson continued the tradition of only remaining president for 2 terms, and he threw his support behind Vice President Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren had issues. Basically, as soon as he got into office, there was an economic crisis which gripped the nation. It's known as the Panic of 1837, but economic conditions in the country remained unsettled for his entire term as president. People were so frustrated that they all blamed Martin Van Buren, and they gave him the nickname Martin Van Ruin. So, poor guy. I say poor guy, I didn't know him. He may have been a jerk. Anyway, so Martin Van Buren was nominated for a second term, even throughout all of this, and the Whigs united behind William Henry Harrison, also known as Old Tippecanoe, and balanced the ticket with John Tyler of Virginia, a Democrat who had broken with Jackson over nullification. The Democrats did what they could to win by opposing congressional interference with slavery. This was the first time a political party took a position on what they called the peculiar institution, and it was done both in response to a growing abolitionist sentiment in the North and simply to reflect the position of the Democratic constituency in the South. But the campaign itself was not really about issues. William Henry Harrison, when gaining the presidency, he had the old name of Old Tippecanoe, right? So as he and John Tyler are campaigning, the slogan was Old Tippecanoe and Tyler too, or just Tippecanoe and Tyler too. That was their slogan. It implied, flag waving, nationalism with a dash of Southern sectionalism, one author wrote. William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe, he gets this nickname during the Indian Wars because, just like Andrew Jackson, he was considered a great Indian fighter. But what's interesting, if we go back just a few slides, you'll see there's a quote from a Shawnee Native American. He once said, "When a white army battles Indians and wins, it's called a great victory. But if they lose, it's called a massacre." And this really sort of embodies the sentiment that white Americans had over Native Americans. Native Americans were barbarians, they were savages, and they were in the way of progress. So, Old Tippecanoe and Tyler too take the presidency, but Old Tippecanoe does not last very long. He lasted about 32 days in office before he died from complications from pneumonia. He was working out in the cold rain, I believe. So John Tyler becomes president upon his death, and he became known as His Excellency. That was his nickname, His Excellency, because he wasn't voted in as president. Oh no, he was vice president. He got the presidency by accident, they said. John Tyler, interesting dude, again born in Virginia about 1790. He was raised believing that the Constitution must be strictly construed, and he never wavered from this conviction. He attended the College of William and Mary to study law. As he got older, served in the House of Representatives from 1816 to 1821. And Tyler voted against most nationalist legislation and opposed the Missouri Compromise. After leaving the House, he served as governor of Virginia. As a senator, he reluctantly supported Jackson for president, basically seeing Jackson as the lesser of the evils. Tyler soon joined the states' rights Southerners in Congress, who banded with Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and their newly formed Whig Party, which opposed President Jackson. The Whigs nominated Tyler for vice president in 1840, hoping for support from the other Southerners who were pro-states' rights, and obviously were victorious. At first, the Whigs were not too disturbed, although Tyler insisted upon assuming the full powers of a duly elected president. He even delivered an inaugural address, and it seemed full of good Whig doctrine. Whigs, optimistic that Tyler would accept their program, very soon were disillusioned. The Whigs soon expelled Tyler from their party. All the cabinet resigned, but Secretary of State Webster. A year later, when Tyler vetoed a tariff bill, the first impeachment resolution against a president was introduced in the House of Representatives. A committee headed by Representative John Quincy Adams, hey, there he is again, reported that the president had misused the veto power. But the resolution failed. Despite their differences, President Tyler and the Whig Congress enacted much positive legislation. I'm so sorry for all of the movement. Let me get resituated here. All right, here we go. The log cabin bill enabled a settler to claim 160 acres of land before it was offered publicly for sale, and later pay $1.25 an acre for it. In 1842, Tyler did sign a tariff bill protecting northern manufacturers. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty ended a Canadian boundary dispute. In 1845, Texas was annexed. The administration of this proponent of states' rights strengthened the presidency, but it also increased sectional cleavage that led toward civil war. And ultimately, that's what we're seeing throughout the rest of this lecture series is, how did we get to war? This is the road to war. By the end of his term, Tyler had replaced the original Whig cabinet with Southern conservatives. In 1844, Calhoun became Secretary of State, and later these men returned to the Democratic Party, committed to the preservation of states' rights, planters' interests, and the institution of slavery. Whigs became more representative of northern business and farming interests. So this is where we see a great discrepancy between the two. The picture that you see here is really like a piece of propaganda. Pictures were painted to encourage people to fulfill their manifest destiny. So this picture shows America, and that would be the lady in the picture, right? Floating over the plains. She's bringing light to the dark and desolate landscape and shows the way for farmers. You can see the farmers down in like the covered wagon there. Travelers, that would be like pioneering people, the people who are on horseback there. As well as the stagecoach. You can see that in the foreground. Here, I'll get a little closer. Can you see it underneath America there? Yeah, stagecoach. All right. Let's see, stagecoaches. What else? Also the telegraph and the railway. If you look in the very back of the picture, and again, I'm sorry for wiggling around. I'm just going to point here. If you look in the very... Okay, sorry. If you look in the very back of the picture, you can see the railroads. And the trains trying to make their way out west. So ahead of her, you can see, ahead of America, you can see Native Americans, buffalo, other wild animals. They're all, and also the darkness. Look at that. Look, the front part of the painting here is much darker than what it is to the far right. So the idea is that America is bringing the light to the darkness. And requiring those that rule the dark to turn and run away, leaving the way clear for settlement. So manifest destiny, very important ideal for these American settlers, American pioneers. So John Tyler was succeeded by James Polk from Tennessee. And immediately he has issues as well. Let's see. Following Texas' successful War of Independence against Mexico in 1836, President Martin Van Buren, so we're backing up a little bit, President Martin Van Buren refrained from annexing Texas after the Mexicans threatened war. Accordingly, while the United States extended diplomatic recognition to Texas, it took no further action concerning annexation until 1844, when President Tyler restarted negotiations with the Republic of Texas. His efforts culminated on April 12th in a treaty of annexation, which was an event that caused Mexico to sever diplomatic relations with the U.S. Tyler, however, lacked the votes in the Senate to ratify the treaty, and it was defeated by a wide margin in June. Shortly before he left office, Tyler tries again, and this time it is through a joint resolution of both houses of Congress. With the support of the then president-elect, Mr. Polk, Tyler managed to get the joint resolution passed on March 1st, 1845, and Texas was admitted to the United States on December 29th of that year. While Mexico did not follow through with its threat to declare war if the U.S. annexed Texas, relations between the two nations remained tense due to Mexico's disputed border with Texas. According to the Texans, their state included significant portions of what is today New Mexico and Colorado, as well as the western and southern portions of what we now know as the state of Texas. And they claimed that these borders extended to the Rio Grande River. The settlers, the Americans claimed that the border extended to the Rio Grande River. The Mexicans, however, argued that the border only extended to the Nueces River several miles to the north of the Rio Grande. So in July of 1845, Polk, who had been elected basically on a platform of expansionism, so he says, hey, we're going to expand, we're going to get more territory, we're going to have more that we can call America, right? Elected on a platform of expansionism, he ordered the commander of the U.S. Army in Texas, who was Zachary Taylor, to move his forces into the disputed lands that were in between the two rivers. In November, Polk dispatched Congressman John Slidell. That name sounds familiar, doesn't it? Slidell, Louisiana. That's what it's named for. So he sends Congressman John Slidell to Mexico with instructions to negotiate the purchase of those disputed areas along the Texas-Mexican border, as well as the territory comprising the present-day states of New Mexico and California. Following the failure of Slidell's mission in May 1846, President Polk used news of skirmishes between Mexican troops and Taylor's army to gain congressional support for a declaration of war against Mexico. But there's an issue here. The president neglected to inform Congress that the Mexicans had used force only after Taylor's troops had positioned themselves on the banks of the Rio Grande, which was effectively Mexican territory. So on May 13th, 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico, ultimately because President Polk moved forces into place so that the Americans could finish a war that Mexico would start. Following the capture of Mexico City by the Marines in September 1847, we see Nicholas Trist, the chief clerk of the Department of State and Polk's peace emissary, begin negotiations for a peace treaty with the Mexican government. And these would have been under terms similar to those pursued by Slidell the previous year. So September 1847, I have from the halls of Montezuma. That's the first line of the Marine Corps hymn. And me being the daughter of a Marine, I couldn't help but leave it in there. From the halls of Montezuma to the... Okay, I'm going to stop singing now. So, what are we at now? Oh, Nicholas Trist. Okay, so Nicholas Trist is there, and Polk is growing concerned by Trist's conduct. However, believing that he would not press for strong enough terms from the Mexicans, as well as because Trist became a close friend of General Winfield Scott, who was a Whig, and also a strong contender for the presidential nomination, Polk has issues. So furthermore, the war had encouraged expansionist Democrats to call for a complete annexation of Mexico. And Polk recalled Trist, that means he brought him back, or tried to, in October. But Trist refused to go because he believed that he was on the cusp of an agreement with the Mexicans. And he presented President Polk with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was signed in Mexico City on February 2nd, 1848. Under the terms of the treaty, Mexico ceded to the U.S. approximately 525,000 square miles, which was a little over half of its pre-war territory, in exchange for a $15 million lump sum payment. So, write a check for $15 million. And the assumption by the U.S. government of up to $3.25 million worth of debts owed by Mexico to U.S. citizens. While Polk would have preferred a more extensive annexation of Mexican territory, he realized that prolonging the war would have really bad political consequences. So he decided to submit the treaty to the Senate for ratification. There was substantial opposition to the treaty within the Senate, but it did pass in March of 1848 by a very thin margin. But the war had another significant outcome. On August 8th, 1846, Congressman David Wilmot introduced a rider into an appropriations bill that stipulated that, quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any territory acquired by the United States in the war against Mexico. That's kind of a big deal. So while Southern senators managed to block the adoption of what was called the Wilmot Proviso, it nonetheless provoked very much a political firestorm, because now we have politicians who are actively engaged in trying to remove or greatly lessen slavery. So this is where we're going to leave off for this second video presentation. And we're going to pick up next time right here with reform. There's a great deal of reform that takes place in the 19th century. And a lot of these reform efforts will also sort of play not necessarily a direct hand. Some of them, yes, some of them, no. Sort of an indirect, roundabout hand in the road to war.